came here chasing a better life too, huh? The so-called land of opportunity. Liberty City. Skyscrapers, suits, dirty money, and broken dreams. Everyone's got a story here, but most don't end well. Still, you keep pushing. Because maybe, just maybe, there's something waiting at the end of the grind. A little peace, a little rest. Well, I've got something for you. Give me your ears for a while, and I'll give you quiet. No noise, no pressure, no past, just you. And the sound of the city fading away. Liberty City never sleep, but you will. You think Vice City and Los Santos are some kind of vacation? Go ahead. Chase the sun, kiss the pavement, make some enemies. Just don't expect mercy. Not every city forgives.
The rain didn't stop in Liberty City, just learned to fall quieter, like it had secrets to keep. On the cracked sidewalks of Broker and the steel bones of Algonquin, the city pulsed with a nervous kind of energy. Old buildings wore the weight of every crime, every deal, every whispered promise made beneath flickering street lamps. That was where Vincent Blake stepped off the bus, a duffel bag, a busted watch, and a debt that followed him from the desert back to the cold, brutal hum of the Northeast. He wasn't back to settle. He was back to rewrite. Liberty was a city that tried to forget you, but Vin had come to make sure it remembered. Asterisk, the rain fell in sheets, turning Broker streets into slick mirrors of broken neon and rusted street signs. Vincent Blake stepped off the half-empty MTA bus and into the hush between droplets, the hiss of tires on asphalt replaced by the soft scuff of his boots. His duffel bag felt heavy against his shoulder, not from clothes, but from the weight of every promise he'd broken since he left this city behind. He didn't look back at the bus's rear window as it eased away. He knew what he'd see, a ghost of the man he used to be, fading in the fog, steam curled up from manholes at random intervals, smelling of damp sewer gas and yesterday's garbage. A rat darted between the puddles, vanished under a parked Crown Victoria. The sidewalks were littered with yellowed flyers peeling off lampposts. Jobs wanted, rewards offered, warnings scrawled in spray paint. Don't trust the Leone boys. Vin's jaw tightened. The Leone family's name was a scar on this borough, a reminder of debts paid in blood. He pulled his coat tighter against the damp wind and started walking east toward the waterfront, where cargo cranes loomed like dark giants silhouetted against the faint glow of Manhattan spires. Every step echoed off tenement walls caked in grime. He passed a shuttered deli with its windows boarded and a makeshift memorial taped to the door. A faded photo of a kid with a gummy smile and a single rose taped beneath it. Liberty City didn't mourn long. It moved on just like he had until now. At the corner of Cherry and Mott, an old man hawked newspapers under a flickering street lamp, shouting headlines about a crooked councilman and an upcoming election. His voice cracked like dry wood extra. Crime up 30% while our city survived the summer. Ven paused, considered snapping his fingers for the man's attention, but the vendor's eyes were dead behind milky lenses. He dropped a folded dollar on the curb and moved on. A half block further, he ducked into an alley to light a cigarette. The flame from his lighter cast ragged shadows on brick walls streaked with decades of graffiti. Welcome to Liberty in looping letters. He inhaled the smoke until his lungs burned, tastes of tar and ice water lingering on his tongue. When he exhaled, white mist drifted upward, mingling with the steam and rainy city breathing around him. In the distance, sirens wailed. A police cruiser skidded past, lights fading into the haze. He'd seen too many nights like this, the thin blue line stretched to cover every vice. But tonight, the law was a distant hum. His focus was on one address, a rundown loft on Hove Beach where his old friend Desio was supposed to meet him. Desio knew everyone: cabbies, dock workers, fixers. He'd been his anchor when everything else tilted off its axis. As he trudged toward the subway entrance, he heard the faint rumble of an elevated train passing overhead. Its wheels screeched on the rails, a metallic howl cutting through the ambient drizzle. He descended concrete steps coated in algae, each footfall measured and slow. In the station, flickering fluorescent lights revealed cracked tiles and a lone turnstile guarded by a sleeping token collector. Finn stepped through without paying, stepping into the platform gloom where the air was warmer and smelled of oil and human breath. The one train rattled in moments later, doors opening with a pneumatic hiss. He climbed in and found a seat beneath a flickering bulb, peeling back his duffel and pulling out a small notebook. Inside were names, dates, and scribbled amounts figures that added up to one final play. He ran a finger down the list. Taisha Marquez, front girl for the Yamaguchi Syndicate. Joey Knuckles Santos Macel for the Cartel de la Frontera. And at the bottom, the name that made his pulse skip: Carmine Leon. He closed the notebook, the train jolting him forward. Carmine Leon's empire had grown while he was gone, and the Leon boys didn't forget slights. But Vin had returned. Not for revenge alone, he'd come to rewrite history, to carve out a place where he could stand without looking over his shoulder. When the train door slid open at Hove Beach, the rain had eased to a mist. He stepped out onto the platform, the salt Thames of the bay drifting through rusted grates. Above him, the Ferris wheel lights from Shoreside Vale winked like lighthouses guiding desperate souls. He dropped the hood of his jacket and stepped into the night, every sense alert, every nerve alive. Vin Blake's return to Liberty City was more than a homecoming. It was the opening move in a game where the stakes were power, survival, and the chance to be remembered. The city whispered his name on the wind, like a challenge he was ready to meet. And somewhere beyond the neon and the rain, he could almost hear it, the rumble of destiny rolling down the tracks, waiting for him to claim it. Asterisk. Under the dim glow of a single bare bulb, Desio's loft smelled of stale espresso and old secrets. Vincent Blake slipped inside, rain still beating on his shoulders, and found his old friend hunched over a battered wooden table. Maps were spread out like a bloody puzzle, red pins stuck into every corner of broker, board tutor, and beyond. Desio didn't look up. He merely tapped a finger against a stain on the paper. They moved shipment 6 hours ago, he said without preamble, voice low. 40 crates of low-grade arms headed for Carmine's new dock on Bridge Street. We hit it tonight. Ven nodded, setting his duffel down. He laced his fingers and studied the map, a brooding stretch of warehouse fronts, the long pier jutting into fog-choked water. Shipping containers sat stacked in fortress-like rows, security cameras on every corner. What's the guard rotation? He asked. 2 teams, Desio replied, sliding another sheet forward. Team A patrols the perimeter for guys with shotguns, 2 in the tower. Team B hauls the cargo once it hits land. They shift every 4 hours, but they don't expect anyone inside, especially not someone with Newport on his collar and a conscience. Ving traced a line with his fingertip. We'll need a distraction. He reached into his coat and pulled out 2 small cylinders, homemade flashbangs wrapped in oilcloth. These'll buy us 15 seconds of chaos, enough to cut the locks and clear the perimeter. Desio grinned for the first time in years. You still handcraft your toys, he said. I missed that. Vin allowed a half smile, his thoughts already racing down Bridge Street. We split up. I go up the pier, neutralize Team A. You slip into the loading bay and pop Team B while they handle the crates. Then we rendezvous at the old lighthouse on Sands Point. Move fast, talk slow. Outside the rain had tapered to a mist. Vin pulled his hood up and joined Desio in loading twin Glocks under their jackets. They slipped into the night, to shadows, dissolving into Broker's grid of cracked sidewalks and shuttered storefronts on Bridge Street. The warehouse loomed above them like a jagged tooth. Crates stamped with Leone's insignia waited by the dock's edge, illuminated by cold floodlights. Then pressed his back against a rusted dumpster, waiting for Desio's signal, a single fist raised. When it came, Vin lobbed the first flashbang at the tower entrance. The explosion of white light summoned chaos. Alarms blared, guards staggered, eyes blinded. Vin dashed forward, silenced Glock, firing 3 quick rounds into the crouching sentry at the guard tower before he could recover. The second guard spun, shotgun raised, but Vin's second flashbang detonated at his feet, while the guard reeled. Vin flooded the area with precise shots, dropping him in a heap of rain and shadows. Inside the loading bay, Desio moved like a wraith. 2 dock workers hefted crates onto a pallet jack. He slipped behind them and slashed their throats with a curved knife, so clean they never knew he was there. He whispered an apology over the closest ear before dragging their bodies out of sight and cutting the padlocks that kept the munitions sealed. Vin joined him moments later with Desio's stolen keycard dangling from his finger. They worked in silence, reconfiguring the locks, sliding open the warehouse doors just enough for Desio to roll the crates out onto empty pallets. Behind them, the distant wail of sirens told them reinforcements were coming. Vin slapped a hand on Desio's shoulder. "Time," he growled. They wheeled the pallets into a concealed corner beneath a rusting conveyor belt and snapped on the remote detonator. The crates erupted in a thunderous roar, metal shredding outward in a perfect storm of shrapnel that shredded cameras and stunned every guard on the dock. Flames licked the rain-slick concrete, and the sea churned in reply. And Desio slipped away down a narrow dock ladder, letting the explosion's roar swallow their footsteps. They sprinted through back alleys to the old Sands Point lighthouse, its whitewashed bricks stained with salt and lichen. At the base, a battered speedboat waited, engine throbbing like a living beast. Dot inside, Desio exhaled hard, wiping sweat and rain from his brow. 40 crates of pride and paper, he said, gone. Then stared back at the burning warehouse, its flames reflecting in his cold gray eyes. Not gone yet, he corrected. We left a message. They tore across the bay under a silver moon, engines throbbing. Every wave they cut through carried them farther from Leone's corrupt empire and closer to the next stage of Vin's plan, forging alliances with the Yamaguchi and the Cartel de la Frontera, pitting one power against the other until they all fell at his feet at dawn as the speedboat roared into a hidden cove behind Hove Beach. Vincent Blake looked out at Liberty City's shoreline creeping into view. Rain had returned, the streets glistened like wet obsidian, and the city's staccato heartbeat thrummed beneath it all. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the photo of Carmine Lyons, smiling, arrogant, untouchable. Vin crushed it in his fist, fragments of glossy paper drifting into the sea. "Remember me," he whispered, voice swallowed by the wind, because in Liberty City's unforgiving pulse, the man who dared to topple its kings would become the one name etched in every alley, every skyline reflection, and every bullet's echo. And Vincent Blake had only just begun. Asterisk. They beached the speedboat in silence, the midnight tide slipping them onto the black sand of Hove Beach. Vincent Blake and Desio lugged the wet duffels up the dunes. leaving behind the hush of diesel engines and distant sirens. Above them, the Ferris wheel's colored lights spun like a metronome, marking time in a city hungry for its next high-stakes gamble. Vin shook salt from his hair and glanced at Desio. "You ready to talk to ghosts?" Vin asked. Desio nodded, shoulders squared. "Where to first?" Vin unfolded a damp piece of paper. On it was an address scrawled in red ink. Tasha Marquez, Lotus Dragon Lounge, Chinatown. He slipped the note into his coat. "We pay a visit to the Yamaguchi. Show them we can pull walls down for them." They piled into a rusted Volvo sedan Desio at the wheel. Finch in the passenger seat then roared north through Broker. Neon signs blurred into rivers of red and gold as they threaded through Chinese lanterns strung overhead. At the corner of Mott and Willow, they ducked into an alley and followed graffiti arrows to a neon-lit doorway guarded by two tattooed bouncers. One flicked a glance at their soaked coats, the other at the sprig of fennel tucked in Vin's lapella silent signal. Inside, the Lotus Dragon Lounge was awash of crimson velvet and dark wood. Bamboo screens carved with dragons separated private booths. The air smelled of jasmine tea and cigarette smoke. On stage, a singer in silk slid between notes of a haunting ballad. At a low table by the far wall sat Tasha Marquez, high cheekbones, a jade bracelet glinting on her wrist, an iced sack in front of her. Two Yamaguchi enforcers flanked her eyes, sharp as knives. Ving bowed his head. "Ms. Marquez, thank you for seeing us." She inclined her chin. "Blake, you left town like a shadow. Now you want our trust with storefront weapons. Explain yourself." Desio laid out a damp duffel on the table and unzipped it to reveal stripped shotgun receivers, soulless metal. Waiting for trigger's end, a single folded photograph. The burning warehouse on Bridge Street. "We destroyed Leone's arms cache," Desio said. "Those crates were his, meant to start a war here. Tonight, you decide if we saved your streets or damned them." Tasha studied the photo, then met Vin's gaze. "You make a hell of a first impression, but alliances aren't won by fire alone. We won stability control of Chinatown, and your word that no Leone foot soldier will darken these doors again." Vin slid forward. "You'll have it. I'll send a message. Leone's docks are off limits. If he tries to move arms into your territory, I'll surface every secret he's ever buried. On the other side, I ask for safe passage through your supply lines and a cut of the profits. Fair?" She tapped her jade bracelet on the table. 15% and no loose ends. She looked to Desio. "You're responsible for cleanup in these alleys. Every body must vanish." Desio inclined his head. "That's on me." Tasha smiled thinly. "Deal." She raised her glass. Vin and Desio matched her sake, mingling with the lounge's heavy chords. In that toast, an unspoken vow sealed the new partnership. Vin's rise would be fueled by Yamaguchi's network and he would wield their power like a blade. The next morning, Vin walked into Desio's loft, feeling the city's chill in his bones. Rain drummed against the single-paned window. Desio was already at the table, burning maps under a desk lamp that went smoother than I thought. Vincent.de's Axio tapped a different map, this one showing Eastborough's warehouses. Now we visit Joey Santos. The cartel, Della Frontera, thinks they own the docks near Shorehaven. Santos wants arms moved upstate. He needs to know you can give Antic what he needs. Ven rubbed his jaw. Santos isn't one for subtlety. Good, we'll play his game. Desio slid forward a manila envelope stamped with a black hawk. Inside shipping manifests and Santos's ledger lines payments for bribes, gunrunners, and lost shipments. We use that. blackmail him into supply agreements, or show him the ledger on a dead shore. Vin closed his eyes. Let's meet him at the old tidefish warehouse at drop 2 in the morning. Bring the ledger and a pair of silenced pistols. At 2 a.m., Vin and Desio parked across from the decaying tidefish facade, windows boarded, a single floodlight burning. A black Humvee rolled up, driven by Santos's Lieutenant Longcoat, pistol grip visible against his hip. Vin stepped into the light, pockets empty of any weapon save the ledger folded in his hand. You Blake? The lieutenant asked. Vin nodded. And this is Desio. He extended the folder. Your boss's books. Take them or watch your empire sink in your own numbers. The lieutenant scanned several pages, eyes widening. You got guts. Santos wants a word. He returned to the Humvee. And a minute later, Carmine Leone's former Lieutenant Joey Knuckles Santos himself stepped out. Knuckles was broad, tattooed, scarred from knife fights he'd won, and wore a grin like cracked pavement. Thought you were dead, Santos said. If I was, Vin replied, you wouldn't have this. He flipped the ledger face up. Your last shipment never arrived. My men intercepted it. That's money and guns you promised your own. Santos laughed low. Punish me if you want. Vin met his eyes. I'd rather we did business. I can clear your name, reroute new shipments, export through my channels. But you owe me a cut, and you never accuse me of theft again. Santos rubbed his chin. 50,000 a week. He nodded at Desio. And your guy here stays on my dock as muscle. Desio inclined gladly. Ving offered a rare smile. Done. Santos raised a flask, took a long swallow, then offered it to Ving. 2 new alliances. Vin tilted the flask, letting the burn of tequila trace his throat to survival. By dawn, Vin Blake had turned to rival underworlds into partners beneath his banner. The rain had stopped, leaving city streets glistening like wet slate. He and Desio slipped back to the loft, sealing their alliances in the hush before the sun rose. Yamaguchi's reach and the cartel's docks now at his command. Vin leaned against the window, watching Liberty City stir awake. Taxis honking on broker avenues, delivery trucks unloading in Port Tudor, fishing boats heading out of Shoreside Vale. He felt the fit of power settle over him like a tailored suit. Desio cracked the blinds. What now? Ving folded his arms. Now we rebuild. Move deeper into Algonquin and Bohan rent out high-rises by media outlets. Make sure every corner where a name is whispered, it's Blake. He tapped the notebook in his jacket, pocket pages of debts to collect, names to remember, empires to crush. In Liberty City's steel and concrete heart, Vincent Blake had forged an alliance so lethal it would keep every rival at bay. But this was only the opening act. He crushed the notebook in his palm, dusted his coat, and stepped into the rain-kissed street, each footstep echoing like a verdict. Liberty City might forget debts, dissolve in morning haze, but Vin Blake planned to make sure his name never slipped into the fog. Not ever. Neon reflections danced on the slick asphalt as Vincent Blake strode down Delancey Street toward the Algonquin skyline. The night air smelled of diesel exhaust and distant clove cigarettes, broken by the thrum of a Tommy gun buried inside an alley 2 blocks away. He never moved without backup Naudizio's crew, shadowing him like a pack of hungry dogs yet. Vin felt the old adrenaline, pulse stronger than any bodyguard could provide. His destination was a low-rise building nestled between a sushi bar and a high-end catwalk boutique, the offices of the Liberty Ledger. He'd quietly purchased a controlling stake that afternoon, using shell companies and coded wire transfers, another brick in his growing media fortress. Tonight, he met with Clara Novak, the paper's new editor-in-chief, to discuss a front-page feature positioning him as Liberty City's second wave entrepreneur, legitimate titan rising from the ashes of crime. Inside, the newsroom buzzed beneath fluorescent lights. Reporters tapped at keyboards, editors barked headlines, and the smell of burnt coffee hung heavy. Clara, her red hair tucked behind one ear, waited by the large conference table. She offered him a firm nod. "Mr. Blake," she said, sliding a draft article across. "I've softened the language no underworld references. It reads like a business origin story. Then read the lead. A former desert drifter turned city fixer." He smirked. "Desert drifter? Have we no pride?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Readers love an underdog, but we frame you as a problem solver. Clean streets, new jobs, higher tax revenues." He tapped the page. "Make it credible. Promise of clean streets, but I need to control the narrative on the Leone tax and Yamaguchi alliance. Understood?" She clicked her pen. "Tomorrow's edition will cement your public image. After that," she trailed off. He leaned back. "After that, we expand. Bohan zoning board hearings next week. They approve my waterfront complex. It's a public victory." She nodded and rose. "I'll finalize this tonight. Expect no surprises." On his way out, a lanky reporter with a crooked tie caught his sleeve. "Mr. Blake, any comment on Detective Ramirez's inquiry into the Bridge Street explosions?" Finn's smile sharpened. "Detective Ramirez is welcome to investigate, but his time is better spent investigating real corruption." He walked away before the question could breed doubt. Outside, a bronze plaque by the door read Liberty Ledger Publishing. Underneath, a cluster of umbrellas huddled by a stairwell Dizio's men. Finn slipped his coat collar up against the drizzle and climbed into their bulletproof SUV. Dot as the city lights blurred past. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "You own the paper by day. By night, the news owns you. H." He stopped mid-turn. H, the initial of the man who'd first briefed him on Chimera, Henry Hawk Oswald, a DC fixer with ties to Senate intelligence committees. Hawk rarely texted. When he did, it meant something bigger was stirring in the Capitol. Finn pressed back the leather seat. "Decrypt that, Frankie." Frankie's fingers flew. "It's a warning. Hawk says federal assets are set to launch a probe into the Ledger's new ownership, claiming ties to organized crime laundering funds through media channels." Miranda, sitting shotgun, scrolled her tablet. "They'll freeze bank accounts, seize assets, and trigger DOJ subpoenas. It plays out in 60 hours. Silence settled like a coffin lid. Vin inhaled sharply. "So they want to choke me out of the press before the zoning vote." Dezio cracked his knuckles. "Then we give them a distraction." Vin's eyes narrowed. "The staging must be perfect. We need a story so explosive the feds can't touch our paper assets without looking foolish." Miranda tapped her screen. "I've got one. The mayor's campaign fundraiser on Thursday. Secret off-books donors from Chimera's remnants. We leak the guest list and audio recordings to the Ledger. Full evidence. It Bogwang's City Hall's corruption in real time." Finn allowed a grim smile. "Good. Let the feds chase the mayor. We'll buy a week more of immunity." He stood and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Then we mobilize every network. Yamaguchi couriers deliver copies of that edition directly to precincts, docks, and diners. Make it impossible to suppress." At that moment, the SUV peeled off onto the West Side Expressway, the skyline rising behind them like a challenge. In 6 hours, Liberty City would wake to scandal. In 60 federal agents would scramble, but by then, Vin Blake's new front page would be everywhere, painting him as the whistleblower hero the city needed. He glanced at Miranda, alert Clara that we might need emergency editorial protection. Call in every favor we have, judges, racketeers, ex-prosecutors who owe us. We guard that issue at all costs. Miranda tapped her gums, already in motion. Then turned his gaze to the dark horizon, where the towers of Algonquin pierced the sky. Liberty City had always been a battleground of power and influence. Tonight, he'd remind every faction, federal, municipal, or criminal, that Vincent Blake didn't just command the streets. He commanded the story, because in Liberty City, truth was the most dangerous weapon, and he was about to fire the first shot. Asterisk. The sun was beginning to fall behind the spires of Algonquin as Vincent Blake stood atop a high-rise balcony in Lower Easton, his coat tugged by the breeze coming off the West River. The city glowed in fractured gold, cranes frozen mid-swing like statues from another war. He'd seen Liberty City through its darkest turns, watched it bleed from back-alley betrayals and bureaucratic cuts, but never had it felt so still, like it was waiting. He dialed a number coded into muscle memory. 1 ring. Novak here. Clara's voice crackled through. You have everything, Vin asked, eyes tracking a police chopper circling over the Civic Exchange building. I've got the tapes, the donor ledger, the offshore connections. It goes live tomorrow at 7 a.m. front page and digital rollout across every borough. Good, Vin murmured. Prepare for spin. The city's going to scream. He ended the call before she could ask if he was ready, because ready didn't matter anymore. Momentum did. Downstairs, Desio paced beside the car, muttering into a radio while Miranda coordinated safe houses for their network of editors, printers, and contacts. Once the Ledger S expose broke, retaliation wouldn't just be expected, it would be designed. Vin climbed into the back seat, heart steady as ice. Tonight, he said, we make the whole system blink. By dawn, it began. Newsstands and brokers sold out within 15 minutes. Digital copies of the Liberty Ledger crashed the paper's servers. The headline was surgical: donors' deceit and the mayor's money chimera's ghost in City Hall, inside wiretaps. Falsified campaign filings and whistleblower statements that traced dirty funds from offshore banks through shell charities into the hands of Liberty's most visible elected figures. As planned, the feds didn't move on the ledger, not when the public was watching. By 10 a.m., the mayor held a shaky press conference denying everything. At 10:07, a video surfaced showing him laughing over bourbon with a known chimera treasurer leaked by someone on Vin's payroll. At noon, Desio's phone rang. He passed it to Vin without a word. You got what you wanted, Hawk's voice said. They're gutting their own. City council's turning on itself, but there's fallout, Blake. There always is, Vin replied. You've made enemies higher than this city's skyline. People who live in penthouses above the law. They'll come. They'll find the locks changed, Vin said coolly. A pause, then a laugh. Just make sure the view was worth it. That night, the skyline shivered with blue strobes and breaking news helicopters. Vin sat in the private lounge of the Liberty Crown Hotel, looking down on a city that had both made and tried to erase him. He sipped scotch poured by hands who once feared his name. Miranda updated him in quick, crisp phrases, Imaguchi shipments through their new, clean ports. Cartel emissaries wanted in on municipal contracts. Wall Street firms were calling it the Blake effect. Vin stood and turned toward the window, watching lights flicker in 10,000 rooms. Let them come, he thought. Let the sky fall if it wants. He'd built something that couldn't be touched, not because it was perfect, but because it belonged to the people now. Every borough whispered his name like it was stitched into its blueprints. Vincent Blake didn't conquer Liberty City. He rewrote it, line by line, and tomorrow he'd start on the next chapter. By the time the first subway rumbles of morning cut through the fog, Liberty City already knew its new pulse hand. Vincent Blake felt it humming up through the soles of his shoes. He stood on the screeching platform at Middle Park East, dark, coat pulled tight, phone in hand. No texts, just the ghost of last night's victory, still warm in every alley and newsroom. He stepped onto the train and found a seat beneath a flickering lamp, staring out at the tunnel's black maw as if it were the city's throat, ready to sing a new tune. He rode 3 stops uptown, then peeled off into a side street where the air smelled of fresh-baked bagels and exhaust. At the end of the block, beyond a row of shuttered storefronts, Saturday the Atlas Building, a crumbling Art Deco relic that Vin had quietly acquired last week. Today it opened its doors as Blake & Co. Investments, the front for his next venture. Inside, marble floors were newly polished, booths reupholstered in deep navy leather, and a brass reception desk manned by 2 interns handpicked from Lincoln Areaway's elite private schools, both under strict instructions to smile but never ask questions. Behind the desk, glass doors revealed an office suite where Miranda and Frankie were already at work, running numbers on dual monitors and sketching territory. Maps across whiteboards. Ving slipped through and let the doors click shut. Miranda looked up first. Red Pin paused mid-strike on a market forecast. Frankie barely glanced away from a spreadsheet of shipping routes. They called, Miranda said without preamble. U.S. Attorney's Office. They've opened a money laundering probe into one of our shell companies. Subpoenas go out tomorrow. Frankie closed the laptop and rubbed his neck. Front's getting too clean. We need a glitch in their timeline. Vin pulled off his coat and draped it across a chair. He paced past Franklin's map of Manhattan, slicing up into real estate parcels. Then we give them one. We'll make them chase a phantom. He stopped at the window, watching delivery trucks unload into the courtyard. I want them focused on Marilla and Dashwood, not Blake and Co. We leak evidence that those guys take bribes from Chinatown construction unions. Let the DOJ raid their offices at first light. Miranda's fingers tapped on her keyboard. I can plant the lead fake emails, doctored bank records by midnight. You'll have cover for the week. Ven nodded once, turning to Frankie, and you get Desio to stir up a hit on their lead investigator. Nothing lethal, just enough to spook him off the case. Frankie grinned. I've been dying to try out the new darts. That night, Ven walked the narrow streets of Little Italy, red awnings glowing like embers in the rain. He ducked into Salvatore's a white tablecloth trattoria that doubled as a meeting place for the city's old guard power brokers. At a back table sat Judge Ellen Rose, her silver hair pulled back in a tight knot, eyes sharp as obsidian. Before Vin could sit, she pounded a leather folder on the table. Your people leaked the Marilla and Dashwood files, she said. Feds just raided them. They're screaming for whoever put them up to it. Ven sipped the Chianti she'd poured collateral. Keeps them busy while we reset. She studied him through narrow lids. And how long do you think that bluff holds? The U.S. attorney smells charred paper, not smoke. Ven set his glass down, long enough to cement our footprint in Bohan's revitalization project. I'll close on those waterfront warehouses at dawn. Then sweeping charred paper means we own the docks. Her eyebrow twitched. You're playing with fire. One misstep, and you're not just on the hook, you're swimming with the sharks. He leaned forward. When have I ever walked the shore? At sunrise, the deal closed. The brass seals on the warehouse deeds gleamed in cold light as Vin signed his name. Frankie and Miranda watched as uniformed notaries filed out, leaving Vin standing alone in the cavernous space, empty except for stacks of pallets and the echo of his footsteps. Outside, dock workers paused in their tracks, nodding respect to the man who now held their leases. Vin looked at the East River beyond, where freighters churned toward the open sea. For a moment, he let himself feel the triumph. Then he turned and walked back into the warehouse's yawning darkness, because in Liberty City, every new dawn demanded its own reckoning. Vincent Blake always answered the call, asterisk. The first crates of steel reinforcements arrived at the Bohan docks before dawn, offloaded under the watchful glare of floodlights and Vin's new security crews. He stood atop the control tower, once a ramshackle guard post, and watched 6 longshoremen secure armored shutters around the warehouse. Behind him, Miranda coordinated via radio, every bolt torqued, every sensor tested, every escape route blocked. It was more than protection. It was a declaration. This corner of the city answered to Blake. By mid-morning, the docks hummed with activity. Shipping containers marked Blake & Co. filled one pier, containers stamped Yamaguchi another. Frankie, clipboard in hand, directed forklifts like a conductor guns hidden beneath his trench coat. Old men who skipped their bridge games to watch nodded respect. This was the kind of organized chaos that kept them fed and their kids in school. For a moment, Vin let himself feel satisfaction. He'd built a small empire here, real warehouses, real jobs, real fear in every rival's heart. His peace was shattered at 2 p.m. by the shriek of sirens. A fleet of unmarked black vans rolled onto the dock, tinted windows blacker than the river. At midnight, federal agents in Kevlar spilled out, barking orders. They unrolled warrants for all Blake Properties Bohan warehouses, Middle Park offices, even the Liberty Ledger. Cops scrambled for clipboards. Tech teams slung laptops across crates. Vin watched from above, arms folded, his face unreadable. Miranda's voice crackled in his earpiece. It's a coordinated strike, TF, IRS, FBI. They came through shore roads, canals, air support. They want blood. Vin's reply was calm. Let them search. He clipped his radio off and descended the metal stairs, hood-up boots echoing. At the pier's edge, he stepped into the federal perimeter with 2 of his lieutenants shadowing. Behind, an ATF supervisor, gloved and grim, thrust a warrant at him. Mr. Blake, under the Patriot Enforcement Act, we're seizing all holdings related to illegal trafficking. Ving smiled thinly. You'll need a court order to touch my legal holdings. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a laminated card. Blake & Co. Investments is registered with the SEC. My docks here are licensed with the Port Authority. I suggest you cross-reference before you ruin every honest man working for me. The supervisor's jaw clenched. You're on my turf. As agents fanned out, Miranda slipped past their lines, smuggling in a thumb drive. Frankie coordinated a diversion. A small, controlled fire started on an empty container that spewed clouds of toxic smoke. Alarms blared. Agents dashed toward the blaze, leaving docks half-guarded. Within minutes, Blake's men locked gates behind the distracted marshals and slipped out. No arrests, no seizures, just a whiff of humiliation for the feds. Fen rejoined Miranda in the shadows. That drive, what's on it? She plugged it into a burner tablet. Files of bank transfers, offshore shell corporation records, bribes routed through non-existent NGO's evidence, not just of his innocence, but of the very federal officials who'd moved against against him, double-edged. She said we either release it publicly or use it to call in favors from the very agents who led this raid. Vin nodded. Keep it close. He surveyed the dock's chaos, smoke drifting over armored shutters, agents coughing at the edge of the fire, Vin's own crews emerging unscathed. Liberty City doesn't forget when its king is challenged. 2 days later, the morning papers splashed a story under the headline, Fed raid backfires, officials probed for bid rigging at bogus charities. Embedded videos showed agents stumbling through locked docks, trucks leaving under escort, and Blake's representative offering sealed envelopes to stunned ATF supervisors. Within hours, an internal investigation froze the agents involved, and a new unit was formed, Office of Integrity Enforcement. The Port Authority quietly rescinded the raid permit that night. Vin held a celebration at the Liberty Crown Hotel's rooftop bar. Lanterns glowed against the skyline. Champagne flowed. A jazz quartet blew notes into the humid air. Miranda and Frankie raised their glasses. To the raid that never happened, Frankie toasted. To the Empire, Vin corrected, smile softening, and to every hand that tried to take it. But even as the music played, Vin knew the next challenge was closer than he imagined. Moving into Algonquin's high-rise strip clubs, they'd been patient, watching the Yamaguchi and cartel flanked by Blake's shadow. Now they sent emissaries, a cryptic invitation to a game of skill and honor at a nondescript club in Chinatown. Vin accepted, not because he feared them, but because he never let rivals write the rules. 3 nights later, he arrived at the Red Star, its neon sign humming like a warning. The coat check took his signature. A hostess led him through crimson velvet to a back room where 3 Russian men in tailored suits waited, each older, colder, with reputations carved in bone. Their leader raised a glass of vodka. Mr. Blake, he said in accented English, we respect your work in Bohan. The Bratva seeks partnership. Vin surveyed the dark mahogany table between them. On it lay a wooden board set with pieces resembling ivory knuckles and gold coins. I don't do partnerships, he replied. I do alliances. He extended a hand. If you want my collaboration, you play my way. You share profits. You respect my territories. You keep your book open. Or you play silent hand. We see how quickly you vanish in the dockyard fog. A long pause. Then the Russian smiled a thin, dangerous curve. We will consider this offer. Vin rose. I'll await your answer with interest. Outside, rain began to fall again, as if Liberty City itself wept at the endless bargains struck in its streets. But Vin Blake walked into that storm without fear, because here, in the steel and water heart of Algonquin and Broker and beyond, power wasn't given or taken, it was negotiated, and Vincent Blake was the world's finest dealmaker. The rain had barely paused when Vin Blake summoned his lieutenants to the hidden vault beneath the Liberty Crown Hotel. Miranda laid out the Bratva's terms on a steel table, a single mission to prove his worth, a high-value courier of their cryptographic ledger, hidden in plain sight at the Shelburne Financial Center. Succeed, and the Russians would grant him half their Algonquin slip rights. Fail, and they'd reclaim every kilo of his Yamaguchi shipments. By dusk, Vin's team assembled on the roof of the Shelburne, 2 snipers perched behind broken HVAC units, Frankie adjusting his suppressor, and Miranda monitoring comes from a parked unmarked van. Vin himself carried a discreet mallet bearing the sealed drive. They called it the heart of the bear below. The building's gala fundraiser spilled onto the marble lobby, bankers in tuxedos sipping vodka and shaking hands. Under crystal chandeliers at precisely 9:47 p.m., then slipped through the service elevator with Desio. They passed plainclothes security and exited into the gallus chaos. Then in a tox lined with hidden Kevlar, Frankie's sniper echo a single report cut a camera feed on the 12th floor. In that instant, Miranda's voice whispered over the coms, "You're clear," then ducked into the elevator shaft's maintenance hatch. Desio locking the door behind them, they climbed 6 flights of emergency stairs to the communications hub, a locked room lined with server racks and fiber optic cores. Vince slid the drive into the central console. Lights flickered as encrypted files streamed into the mainframe. 30 seconds later, the drive ejected with a soft click. Desio pocketed it. As they turned to leave, the lights snapped on security guards flooding the corridor with shotguns raised. Plan B, Vin rasped. He smashed an emergency panel. The fire suppression system hissed to life, sweeping the hall with chemical fog. Sirens merged with party music below as guards coughed and stumbled. Vin and Desio backpedaled, low and fast, re-emerging into the gala just as Frankie's second shot severed the door's lock. They melted into the crowd, adjusting cufflinks and bow ties as though their hearts hadn't pounded through every step back on the rooftop. Vin held out the drive to the Russian emissary who'd watched every move through night vision scopes. The emissary's cold smile cracked for the first time. "You are worthy," he said, sweeping the drive into his coat pocket. "Tomorrow, the docks are ours together." As dawn broke over Liberty City's skyline, Vincent Blake retreated to his penthouse. The Bradfa alliance was sealed, the ledger exchanged, and his empire expanded yet again. But in the hush before sunrise, he knew this was only another threshold. Somewhere in those golden towers, a new challenge was already stirring in Vincent. Blake would greet it with the same quiet ferocity he'd shown tonight. Asterisk before the sun broke fully. Liberty City's morning papers carried a single headline that sent ripples through every power. Broker's breakfast. Senator Fletcher cautions. Doge on Blake probe. Below it, a subline promised revelations of compromised agents and rogue task forces. Vincent Blake read the article over black coffee in his penthouse, eyes calm as hot steam curled from the cup. He'd watched the leaks roll overnight, carefully doctored transcripts Miranda had fed to Capitol Hill reporters, the text messages implicating key agents in pay-to-play schemes. By dawn, the Senate Judiciary Committee was in chaos, and the DOJ had quietly ordered a halt to all Blake investigations until further notice. He set the paper aside and dialed Miranda's secure line status. He asked as her calm voice clicked on Fletcher's office. "Wants a sit-down," she replied. "They've rescinded the grand jury subpoenas. Federal task force dismantled. They're calling off the asset freezes." Then let the news settle like a benediction. "Tell Clara, front page tomorrow. Emphasize a victory for oversight angle. Give them a hero." He ended the call and stood, stretching out the length of his tailored jacket in the lobby. Frankie Delgado was already briefing Desio and the dock's security chiefs. "We'll lift the perimeter in 3 hours, Frankie said, voice low but triumphant. Teams Alpha and Bravo shift back to standard protocols. Miranda's cleared the compromised cell. We're back to baseline." Finn joined them in the subterranean command room, where monitors flickered with live feeds from the docks, the ledger offices, and the warehouses in Bohan. He traced a fingertip along the dotted line on the digital map. New holdings in Firefly Island. A pair of shipping slips in Little Bay. "Move full cargo capacity to Firefly," he ordered. "We open that terminal next week." Hours later, when twilight wrapped the city in violet shadows, Blake and Co-Investments filed a press release. Blake's Liberty Shield initiative to create 2,000 jobs in Bohan Public Partnership approved. The release rippled across social media, and by early evening, council members were clamoring to be photographed at the groundbreaking on Cherry Street. Under the Ferris wheel glow, walker vendors peddled commemorative Liberty Shield caps. At the Docks VIP lounge, reporters toasted Blake with artfully garnished cocktails. Even Detective Ramirez, once the fiercest thorn in Blake's side, raised a glass when approached, his tone deferential. "I'll be needing your help on a new missing persons case," Ramirez said with a smirk. "Hope you're as committed to the city's safety as you claim." Vin nodded, allowing Ramirez to believe the alliance was genuine. In a corner of the bar, a pair of federal agents watched through mirrored lenses, but after the morning's Senate circus, neither dared intervene. Late that night, Vincent Blake slipped away from the celebration and rode the elevator down to the vault beneath the Liberty Crown. Miranda waited, tablet in hand. "Bratva wants their half of the expanded routes," she said. "They've already deployed crews to Firefly and the Yamaguchi," Finn asked. "They're positioning shipments through Southbridge," she replied. "Cartel shipments remain steady." He tapped a finger on the vault door's biometric scanner. "Good. We'll honor our debts, but on our terms." Inside crates bore labels for every front company: steel girders, food imports, digital servers. "Load Firefly with Russian manifests," he said. "Label Yamaguchi crates with Japanese characters. Cartel goes through Bohan slip with encrypted logs." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "Decoy shipments." "Exactly," Vin said. "Let each partner believe they control the supply lines. Meanwhile, we quietly reroute the real cargo through the old Newark docks. No one sees it until it's delivered." She nodded, tapping orders into her tablet. Frankie appeared at the door, grin wide. "We got chatter that the Bratva lieutenant is sending a courtesy entourage to Firefly's grand opening." Van smiled in the low light. "Perfect. We'll stage the reveal there. Let them think they're the center of our empire. Then we pull the rug." He crossed to the vault's far corner and pressed a hand on a hidden panel. A compartment, SLID, open, revealing a single folder stamped confidential. He withdrew it and handed it to Miranda. "Upload this tonight. Expose the Bratva's real backers, Odessa arms dealers with no stake in our game. Let our partners know they're pawns." Miranda's eyes gleamed. "Executed." As the city's neon thrummed above, Blake's final trick took shape in the hush of the vault. A masterclass in betrayal before betrayal. Political cover built on federal embarrassment. Alliances woven of smoke and mirrors dot by the time the dawn bill. Ferries crossed the harbor. Liberty City's new chapter would already be written, and Vincent Blake would be the only author with ink that never dried. The docks of Firefly Island gleamed under strings of lanterns and spotlights as Vincent Blake stepped onto the floating platform, flanked by Yamaguchi emissaries in crisp suits and cartel lieutenants in dark shades. Stamped with Bratva crests lined the etch decoy manifests, planted by Miranda, had already circulated through the Russian channels, promising lucrative arms deliveries. Jazz notes drifted from a barge-turned bandstand, while guests sipped sake tequila and vodka cocktails stirred with ice cubes carved into skulls. Blake raised a glass, his silhouette framed by the city skyline's reflection in the water, and offered a toast to partnerships that reshape Liberty City. Moments later, Frankie's silent alarms whispered through Blake's earpiece. The Bratva lieutenant had arrived, stepping off a black launch decorated with a gleaming double-headed eagle. He strode across the gangway, greeted personally by Blake, who led him past the decoy containers and through a tunnel of red lanterns. Behind them, Yamaguchi operatives watched with polite nods. The cartel's muscle lounged against barrels of special cargo, testing the tension in their grips. Cameras from the Liberty Ledger's live feed crews panned every face Russian, Japanese, Mexican, capturing the spectacle for an exclusive feature on the city's new power triumvirate. At precisely 10:15 p.m., Miranda's signal cut. The power on Firefly's mains. Lanterns flickered out. Spotlights died. A hush swallowed the crowd, broken only by the distant chug of the city's ferries. Then giant projection screens roared to life along the seawall, displaying intercepted bank statements and encrypted communications, shell corporations in Cyprus, oligarchs in Odessa, contracts signed beneath non-existent diplomatic cover. The Bratva lieutenant's face, frozen on the feed, reflected shock and fury as the evidence traced his ledger back to warlords. Operatives had rigged a blank-loaded launcher to shatter the Bratva containers in a spectacular fireball. The explosion lit the night with molten steel rain, igniting smoke canisters that cloaked the dock in orange haze. Panic rippled through the Russians as they fanned out, weapons drawn but thick steel shutters, installed weeks earlier by Frankie's team, sealed off their escape routes, or a third-party hit lowered their guns to regroup, eyes darting between the inferno and the traitorous marquis. Blake strolled through the chaos. He murmured, "You'll find your real shipments waiting in newer contained routes, clear manifests." He handed the Russian lieutenant a sealed envelope containing details on redirecting their legitimate cargo and, crumpled inside the Bratva's expulsion notice from every dock under Blake's control. The lieutenant tore it open, pale under smoky light, as cartel and Yakuza negotiators took out burner phones to confirm Blake's new logistics network. No one refused. By midnight, police and Port Authority patrol boats wheeled in to contain the blaze. Federal investigators arrived too late to seize a single crate. The Bratva men were detained for questioning, their fates uncertain. Yamaguchi and the cartel paid their debts in discreet wire transfers and binding oaths. On shore, headlines blared the next morning. Blake's Firefly fiasco. Bratva pushed out. New trade corridors launched. Social media exploded with images of the inferno and the bristling lineup of rival emissaries forced to kneel before a single man in linen. At dawn, Blake stood once more on his penthouse balcony, watching the smoke plume drift toward Algonquin. He lit a cigar and exhaled, savoring the acrid taste of victory. Miranda joined him, tablet in hand, showing incoming shipments rerouted through Newark Arms. Electronics, cash flows flowing unchecked. They'll rethink any challenge after. Tonight, she said. Blake tapped ash into the wind. Liberty City learns hard and fast. Now every dock, every warehouse, every ledger will bear my signature. And as the city stirred beneath the rising sun, its skyline blazing gold, Vincent Blake knew he'd traded once more in Firand, come away with the keys to the kingdom, by the time the late summer haze settled over Algonquin. Liberty City ran on Blake's schedule. His Newark corridor hummed with uninspected freighters, his Bohan warehouses rippled with legitimate imports, and the docks of Firefly teemed with Yamaguchi crews unloading electronics under Yakuza oversight. Yet beneath the surface of commerce and champagne, whispers gathered in City Hall and the state attorney's office. Rumors of a hidden ledger moving cash into offshore accounts and then back into political campaigns. One humid afternoon, Blake found himself summoned to the mayor's private study, an oak-paneled room perfumed with cigar smoke and panic. Mayor Dominguez, pale behind his desk, gestured to a stack of briefing folders with shaking hands. "Vin, we're in trouble. The state's about to subpoena every business that touched your name. They want proof of corruption at the heart of their own law enforcement." Ving settled into the leather chair opposite, fingers steepled. He let the ticking grandfather clock fill the silence. Then he leaned forward, voice soft but certain. "You called me here for help. You'll have it, but on 2 conditions." He laid out his terms: 1 grant Blake & Co. exclusive redevelopment rights on the South Bridge waterfront, to appoint his people to the new Public-Private Oversight Board. As Dominguez signed, he stammered, "You're saving my career." Vin allowed a half smile. "We save each other." 2 days later, by the ledger, complete with glowing photos of Vin cutting the ribbon at the first South Bridge construction site. Beneath the veneer, Miranda's secret channels scrubbed every digital trail linking him to offshore vaults. Frankie's men intercepted any subpoenas before they left the courthouse that night. He lit a cigar, watched the embers glow. Liberty City's criminal underworld had been tamed into a machine of his design. The legitimate establishment now bent around his will, hard and fast. Behind him, the staccato clack of his phone cut through the night. A single encrypted message. "New target, San Fierro, ready to expand." Vin crushed the banana leaf paper the message was printed on, ashes sprinkling into the river spray. He smiled, tapped out 2 letters. "Let's go." In the hush, before dawn, Liberty City slept under his rule, and somewhere on the horizon, a new empire stirred. The night ferry to San Fierro slipped across the bay under a slate-gray sky, the city lights of Liberty City receding into a ribbon of neon behind Vincent Blake. He'd brought only a single duffel inside, and 3 bricks of unmarked bills to grease the wheels of this new town. By the time the Golden Gate-style bridge came into view, its steel towers hidden in mist, Blake's mind was already unraveling the map of his next empire. They arrived at midnight. The San Fierro International Cargo Ramp was deserted except for 2 armed stevedores. Unloading supply crates, stamped Pacific, Consolidated, and a single black SUV idling under a flickering sodium lamp. Blake climbed into the back seat. Desi slid behind the wheel without a word. Frankie Delgado and Miranda trailed in the shadows, guns tucked beneath raincoats. The city's hills rose up like sleeping giants, dotted with flickering beacons of Victorian houses. Blake inhaled the damp air, tasted salt and gasoline, and something else: opportunity. First stop was Chinatown, where lanterns swayed above narrow alleys crowded with noodle stands and jade-green dragons carved into storefronts. At Polong's Jade Pavilion, Blake met his initial contact, Mr. Wong, a lean man with a scar tracing his left cheek and eyes like polished obsidian. Wong was the local triad lieutenant, guardian of gambling dens and black market electronics. Over steaming bowls of duck-flavored dumplings, they negotiated territory. Blake would secure the old Fisherman's Wharf warehouse for crystal-clear import channels, and in return, Polong's men would handle street distribution of Blake's armament shipments. Wong's nod was silent but absolute, sealed with the clink of sake glasses. From there, the convoy crept up to Japantown, a grid of neon kanji signs and massage parlors tucked into Art Deco facades. Miranda slipped away to confer with the local Yakuza Southry men in tailored suits and inked sleeves who watched her enter through frosted glass. In minutes, she returned with blueprints of the waterfront tourist district and a promise. If Blake could suppress a trio of smuggled meth labs hidden in the Presidio's barracks, Yakuza couriers would grant him long-term use of their high-security shipping routes. Blake counted off the terms in his head: Triad Alliance, Yakuza corridors, and then the final piece, the Russian docks by Firebug Island. He needed a direct line into Eastern Europe, and only the Bratva could provide that. Their emissaries would come later, once he'd proven he could run San Fierro smoother than a brand new Riviera. Next dawn, he slipped into City Hall under a gray drizzle. Mayor Rodriguez's office overlooked the crooked streets of Doherty. The mayor, an aging populist with a penchant for blue suits and scuffed loafers, greeted Blake with forced courtesy. Behind closed doors, Blake laid out his proposal: fund the city's floundering homeless shelters in exchange for a 2-year tax abatement on any new port facilities he built. In the margins of the proposal sat an envelope thick with hush money enough to spare the mayor an embarrassing ethics inquiry. 10 minutes later, Blake left City Hall with zoning permits in hand, a rare win in a town where bureaucracy choked every deal. But San Fierro wasn't Liberty City, and every victory here demanded proof. He turned to Dezio and Delgado that evening. "We had scheduled shipment number 72, he said, voice low enough only to carry over their cigar's ember glow. Shipment 72 was a convoy of high-end electronics bound for Alcatraz Island's tourist gift shops worth $40 million on the black market. They planned a simple snatch. Frankie's men in unmarked uniforms would board the Balo shipping freighter as Stevedore's real crates swapped with empties in the hull's shadows, then vanish before the crew noticed. Blake added one twist. Jim forced the local harbor police radio frequencies to broadcast a false distress call, drawing patrol boats away for 15 minutes. By the time the signal cleared, the real cops would be stuck chasing ghosts in the bay. The night of the heist, mist curled around the freighter's lights like ghost smoke. Frankie and 3 operators moved in under the cover of foghorns, stamping container seals with forged Bala insignia. Miranda monitored the rippling radio static now. She whispered Dan Blake, standing on the dock in plainclothes, keyed the distressed broadcast. Patrol launches peeled off at full throttle. Inside the hull, Dezio and Delgado slipped out with the crates, switching them for cavern-empty boxes marked tourism brochures. 2 minutes later, the alarm sounded. On deck, a boiler malfunction that demanded immediate attention. The engineer's shout drowned beneath the stevedore's curses, and Blake's team melted back into Chinatown's neon haze. Duffels heavier than when they arrived. By sunrise, the real cargo was reloaded into a black yacht, moored in the private slips of the Hillside Yacht Club, long since acquired by a shell company under Blake's name. The electronics would move overland into Nevada before touching San Fierro soil again. Meanwhile, the freighter steamed away, oblivious and intact. Local news the next day blamed harbor workers for a bureaucratic mix-up. No arrests were ever made. That afternoon, Blake hosted a small gala at the refurbished Fisherman's Wharf warehouse, now bathed in floodlights and draped in banners reading San Fierro Commerce Initiative. Triad capos and Yakuza lieutenants sipped imported sake and scotch on the rocks, smiles polite, eyes calculating. Blake raised a glass. "To San Fierro," he said, voice carrying across the cavernous room. "May our ventures be as smooth as this harbor's tide." They drank. The clinks echoed like gunshots in the rafters. Behind them, on a large projection screen, ran live CCTV from the Presidio's meth labs, now stormed by local narcotics squads acting on Blake's anonymous tip. Within hours, 5 arrests were made, 3 labs destroyed. Blake's Yakuza partners received their proof of performance. In the crowd, a lean Russian man in a charcoal coat watched the screen end when Blake turned. The man nodded once, imperceptible but binding dot. Blake slipped away onto the rooftop. A light breeze carried the salt spice scent of the bay. Below, the city spread in ledgers of risk and reward. The docks he'd just conquered, the skyline he'd begun to own. In his duffel, the electronics branded as sanitized imports promised profit that would seed the next expansion. Las Ventura's Vice City again, perhaps even beyond. He inhaled the night air, flames still dancing in his blood. On a nearby table lay a folded note. Safe house secured. Next move, Nevada, meet at dawn. He tucked it into his pocket, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Sanfiro had been a puzzle. Now its pieces clicked into place. Blake exhaled smoke toward the Golden Gate silhouette. Empire was built one night at a time, and he'd just added another brick. The horizon glowed faintly in promise. His shadow slipped into Sanfiro's mist. The legend continued. The hangar door scraped open just as the first bone-white light of dawn crept over the Sierra Nevada. Vincent Blake stepped off the Learjet into the desert chill dry air that tasted of sagebrush and scorched sand. Frankie Delgado and Desi eased out behind him, hauling a pair of military-grade duffels. Behind a row of private planes, Miranda greeted them with a nod. Shades reflecting the runway's striping this way, she said, leading them across cracked concrete toward a blacked-out SUV. The engine's growl swallowed the whisper of wind through mesquite. Blake slid into the rear seat. Frankie and Desio piled in beside him, while Miranda took the wheel. Ahead, the Mojave stretched pale and endless, a road slicing through nothingness toward the low neon column of Las Venturas. Hours later, the skyline rose like a mirage, towers of glass and steel crowned in carnival lights, a promise of fortune and ruin. They slipped past the glitzy front entrance queues, weaving through back alleys to a service dock behind the Calypso Sands Casino. There, Lester the Judge, Wilder Vegas's most discreet fixer, waited alongside two burly expat bosses wearing temporary Calypso IDs. He flashed Blake a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you made it alive," Welder said, voice low. "We've got 48 hours to clear you a path in every major pit. Tonight's the Fremont Street fireworks. Crowds will choke the strip. Perfect cover." Blake nodded. "We hit the vault during the chaos. I want the high roller cages emptied before midnight. Then we walk out with 200 million in chips and unmarked bills." In the Control Centra repurposed suite on the 27th floor, Miranda had CCTV feeds looping camera angles on vault doors, pit cameras, guard routes. Frankie consulted a whiteboard scrawled with schedules. Guard rotations shift at 11:15 p.m. Vault door code changes at 11:30. Fireworks finale starts at 11:45. Desio laid out splash-painted maps of service corridors and steam, tunnels running beneath the strip at 10:30 p.m. Blake stepped into an elevator half full of brides on bachelorette tours, his tuxedo jacket concealing a slim briefcase. Frankie and Desio crowded the service lift next to the casino's staff parking level, dressed as Calypso security. Miranda stayed in the suite, fingers dancing over her laptop to loop camera feeds and jam police radio frequencies. On the floor below, they emerged into a maze of back-of-house corridors. Frankie cut the power to 3 corridor lights. Desio slipped past the guard at the steam tunnel entrance, hand over mouth, a swift blow ending his shift. Blake and Frankie crawled into the soot-black tunnel. They moved knee-deep through hot, fetid steam until they came up under the high roller cage's steel grates just beneath the glittering tables. Above dot at 11:40 p.m., they pried open the grate. Frankie dropped through into the cage floor. Blake followed, briefcase in hand, with jeweler's precision. He punched a hidden override into the briefcase's keypad. Miranda's code, and the vault door behind the pit slid open with a pneumatic sigh. Wrapped head to toe by steam, Frankie and Desio swept crates of chips and bundles of $100 bills onto a wheeled cart. Blake loaded his case with the final stacks, the leather interior snapping shut with the weight of millions. Suddenly, a crescendo outside fireworks ripped the Vegas sky in violet and gold. Miranda cut the feed for one glitching second, then relooped a guard walk-through clip. Frankie jammed the cart into the steam tunnel just as the cage's lights flipped off in a timed blackout. Blake slipped back through the grate carrying the briefcase like an offering. They retraced their steps, emerging into the bachelorette crowd streaming onto the strip for the aftershow. Desio led the way to a waiting stretch limo. Blake climbed in, a briefcase on his lap. The fireworks finale roared overhead, thousands of shells blooming like roses in the desert sky as the limo slipped away down Tropicana Avenue. By dawn the next day, 200 million in chips had been laundered through Calypso's front money operations and funneled into offshore accounts. The unmarked bills still filled Blake's briefcase. At sunrise, Blake stood on the penthouse balcony of the Crown Ruby, Las Venturas' newest hotel casino he'd already financed in the night's heat. Across the neon haze, the strip glimmered like a gilded spine. He lit a cigar, savoring the acrid smoke against the sunrise. Miranda joined him, handing over the final transaction logs. Frankie and Desio arrived moments later, each carrying grim smiles of triumph. San Fierro was a test, Blake murmured, flicking ash into the air. That was the proof. Miranda tapped her tablet. Next up, Atlantic City. They're ripe, failing casinos, desperate owners. We slide in like saviors, then take the whole damn board. Blake dropped the cigar's ember into an ashtray. Let them burn. We're not here to rebuild. We're here to own. And as Las Venturas drowned in its glittering haze, Vincent Blake turned away from the neon towers, already charting the next conquest on the American map. Empire never sleeps, only shifts, and Blake was the ghost writing its next chapter. The boardwalk's neon never slept, but for Vincent Blake, it flickered awake with a sharper promise as he arrived by charter helicopter just before dawn. Below him, the Atlantic Ocean's gray swell pounded the pilings of Atlantic City's hotels. Like a restless heartbeat, the wind off the sea smelled of salt, diesel, and old money an intoxicating blend he'd come to own. A black Mercedes pressed into the hotel valet line at the Neptune Grande, its tinted windows hiding Blake and his Lieutenant Jenny Hurricane Ramirez in the lobby. Marble floors echoed with their footsteps while Frankie Delgado coordinated the night's final prep. Vault blueprints loaded on tablets, slot machine schematics ready, and a list of security codes ghost-written onto disposable sims. Miranda Ferraro slipped in beside him, crimson lipstick still flawless under fluorescent lights. Cam Russo's waiting on the roof, she said. She's got our permits and a front row seat to the operation. They rode the glass elevator to the 22nd floor rooftop bar, where Camille Cam Russo, heir to one of New Jersey's oldest crime families, leaned against a steel railing overlooking the empty boardwalk. She wore a leather jacket stamped with her family's lion crest. Between the salted air and the rising sun, she looked every bit Atlantic City royalty. "You sure about this?" Cam asked, voice low above the wind. "The Ocean Breeze Vault has 20 cameras, infrared sensors, and 2 shift guards. If you trip one alarm, the ACPD bursts in." Blake cracked a grin, lighting a slim cigar. "We disable the cameras. We loop the feeds. We slip past the sensors. We treat the guards to a power outage, courtesy of Frankie, then walk out with 33 million in chips and bills. The city wakes up with a new landlord, Blake and co." Cam exhaled, amber hair whipping around her face. "You're in insane, but I like your style. She handed over for steel engraved keycards. These get you past security levels 1 through 4. No more, no less. After you're in, head to Vault B. The totals reset at 4 a.m., exactly 1 hour before our blackout. At 3 a.m., the boardwalk lay silent under moonlight and mist. Frankie jammed the strips, fiber optic cable, at exactly 3:07, cutting live feeds to every camera except the one above the vault door. Miranda, in a hidden van on Pacific Avenue, projected a pre-recorded loop of an empty hallway to that. Final feed, Blake reached the control room at 3:23. 2 guards watched monitors in navy blazers. He offered them decaf lattes laden with a non-lethal sedative enough to knock them out in under 5 minutes. Inside, rows of glass cages gleamed with chips emerald green for high rollers, cobalt blue for VIPs, and steel crates stuffed with $100 bills. He whispered orders Desio, "Sweep the chips." Jenny snagged the cash boxes. Miranda, "Initiate phase 2. Miranda's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Power's down in 60 seconds. Boardwalk generators overloaded by our diversion at the substation. Cops are rerouting traffic to Albany Avenue. At 3:41, the lights die in the vault's darkness." Blake's team worked by infrared goggles 3 full carts of chips and 2 duffels of cash loaded in 95 seconds. Alarms blared a simulated fire warning. EMTs Frankie and Desio escorted 2 injured staff out on stretchers. Blake strode calmly through the panic. Briefcases in hand, they slipped back through service corridors to the loading bay, where a crew cab van idled with blacktop windows. At 3:52, they piled in. Jenny sprayed a colored smoke bomb behind them. The van's back doors hissed shut. Moments later, ocean breezes, bay lights flickered back on, revealing only an empty stretch of dock by sunrise. The boardwalk buzzed with talk of a phantom heist. Gamblers scratched their heads at empty. Vaults managers blamed a data glitch. Police promised an intensive investigation. Meanwhile, on a private pier 2 miles south, Blake's yacht, the Neptune's claim, rocked gently. Inside, 3 unmarked armored containers waited, emerald green chips destined for Reno's Black Mountain Casino, and cash headed to offshore. Counts in the Caymans. That afternoon, Frankie reported in from the refit yard, containers sealed and rerouted. Officially, Ocean Breeze lost $33 million in a catastrophic system failure. No leads. At 6 p.m., Van Blake stood on the yacht's deck, wind tugging at his coat. Miranda joined him, tablet in hand. On screen, the evening news played interviews with city council members calling for urgent security reforms, the casino's stock plunging 10%, and Cam Russo, socialite cousin, photographed at the reopened vault door courtesy of planted leaks. Blake crushed the final stub of his cigar into the tick railing. "Atlantic City learned fast," he murmured. The penultimate chapter closed, and the finale waited in the shadows of Vice City's neon tides. Asterisk, the twin engines of the jet hummed their last note as Vincent Blake stepped onto the helipad above. Vice City on island of glass towers fringed by palm trees and relentless heat. Below, the boulevard glowed in molten neon, a riot of pinks and aquas, the pulse of a city that never learned to sleep. Blake's coat caught the humid breeze, carrying the distant hiss of waves against docks he'd once controlled and ward to claim. Now it was time to finish what he'd started years ago. Miranda Ferraro and Frankie Delgado met him at the tarmac, faces drawn but resolute. Each carried news of the final phase. Shell corporations merged across 5 port cities, encrypted. Shipping lanes channeled every asset to one vault. Desio was already on site, overseeing the last setup. A network of blackout trigger devices and citywide jam signals primed to cut power at a moment's notice. They moved through the humid dusk to the old Pelican Lounge, long since reborn as the Neon Throne Casino. Electronic banners broadcast grand reopening, while dignitaries and mercenaries mingled under trees of electric blue. Local council members gave toasts praising a new dawn of tourism and safety. Blake listened with a glass of tequila, every cheer echoing like the final beat in a concerto of corruption and ambition. At precisely 11:57 p.m., Miranda's voice whispered in his earpiece, all notes green, 45-second countdown to silent blackout. Frankie slid a finger across a cryptic tablet outside the city's grid, winked and then died. Neon signs sputtered, street lamps stuttered, and the hum of air conditioners fell silent beneath a blanket of startled murmurs. For 30 seconds, Vice City was a shadow-an island without electricity. He saw every rival's safe house go dark, every back alley shortcut unlit. He had rerouted all incoming shipments to his offshore holding, ensured every asset was accounted for. Best-case allies flooded to his headquarters, seeking instructions. When the grid flickered back on, they found one truth. Every live data feed pointed to the Neon Throne as their only beacon. Inside the casino, Blake took the stage. He raised a single finger to hush the crowd. Vice City used to be a war zone of greed and violence, he began, voice carrying effortlessly over the restored speakers. Tonight, it becomes a fortress of enterprise and rule of law. My law. Champagne glasses lifted, their rims catching the light as thousands of eyes fixed on him. He unfolded a map, tracing routes that spanned from Liberty City's docks, through San Fierro's wharfs, Las Venturas's strip, and Atlantic City's boardwalk, each link glowing in neon. "This is our empire," he said, "and now it's unbreakable." When the clock struck midnight, fireworks erupted along the paplums of fuchsia and emerald arching over water that mirrored their glow. Blake watched, arms folded, the ember of a new cigar glowing in his palm. Miranda and Frankie joined him in silence, sharing a rare moment of calm before the inevitable storms of power. Desio appeared at his side, handing him an envelope stamped with the final seal, a list of global shell companies spun into legitimate holdings, every name linked to an account he controlled. The dawn found Vincent Blake on the helipad once more, surveying Vice City's skyline as the sun cast gold across steel and glass. Miranda coded the last of the transfer protocols. Frankie counted the day's receipts, and Desio secured the hangar doors. Blake took a slow breath, tasting the salt and gunmetal on the breeze. Now he stood at the pinnacle, his name a legend whispered in every alley, printed in every ledger, carved into every skyline reflection. He turned to his crew, voice low but unwavering. "We go public at high noon. Every network will know whose turn it is to bow." As the city below stirred to life sirens, traffic, laughter, and the first waves of tourists, Vincent Blake exhaled smoke toward the rising sun. Power was never given. It was taken, consolidated, and defended. And now, with Vice City's neon lights flickering on one by one, his empire was complete and eternal.
Did you know we also have stories based on Vice City? Check out our channel to discover them. Now get out of here before I decide your wallet is worth more than our friendship.